Okay.
We already passed this one.
I don't think so.
We weren't.
No. Okay. So if we think back to mitosis, mitosis takes one cell and makes an identical copy of it. Mitosis keeps the number of chromosomes exactly the same. When a cell in my skin, which has 46 chromosomes, when it goes through mitosis to replace another skin cell, the new cell it produces also has 46 chromosomes. It has the full copy of all of the DNA. But that's not true with this other type of cell division called meiosis. Meiosis is a type of cell division which actually reduces the number of chromosomes in half. It takes cells and makes new cells, but the new cells actually only have half as many chromosomes. So why would that be important? Why would a living organism ever want cells that only have half the number of chromosomes that they should? Anyone think of a reason? Why are these cells necessary? These cells that have half the number of chromosomes?
The smaller, the more you can put in one area.
What's that?
The smaller they are, the more you can fit in an area.
Yeah, but even regular cells with the full chromosomes are not really big. So it's not so much about the size.
So if they make more, it will have more.
I think you're kind of on the right track.
If each of their parents have half, and then they
There's no partner.
Yeah, keep going.
reproduce,
Yeah.
It will go together in the whatever that thing
Offspring.
Offspring will be better. Like it will be more powerful than.
It'll have the full number. You're 100% right, Isaiah. Good.
I just didn't know how to explain.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. So the only reason why cells would be needed to have half the number of chromosomes is because what's going to happen to these cells? They're going to combine, and if we have half and half, we get a whole. And that's what we want. So meiosis only happens to produce special cells for reproduction. Okay? And those special cells have different names. We call them gametes, is like a general term. In animals, we call them sperm and egg cells. Okay? Sperm and egg cells are different from other cells because they don't have the full number of chromosomes. They have half the number of chromosomes. One way a word we use when we're talking about this is diploid and haploid. Diploid means a cell with the full number. In humans, 46. Haploid are the cells that have half that number. So in a human egg cell, for example, how many chromosomes do you think there are?
46.
Nope.
23.
Why 23K?
Because you're giving away half, and then the other breed thingy gives the other half.
Exactly. An egg cell in a human has 23 chromosomes in it. A sperm cell in a human also has 23 chromosomes in it. When they combine during reproduction, you end up with 46 in the offspring, and that's the proper number. So that's why this process of meiosis is important.
What if there's an error in that? There's less numbers or more numbers?
Yeah, good question, Kate. We'll be talking about that, but that does happen sometimes. Sometimes there can be an extra chromosome. Sometimes a chromosome might be missing, and usually that has some impact on the offspring.
Can it be positive and negative, or just negative?
Usually there are abnormalities that happen and with having an extra or missing chromosome, but it does happen sometimes. We'll talk about some of those things later on in this unit. Good question, though. So the phases of meiosis are very similar to the phases of mitosis with a couple important differences. So we're going to just review those here. So, interphase. Just like in mitosis, it's just like the in-between. It's the resting phase, when the cell is just going about its thing. This is also when the chromosomes replicate. They copy themselves, just like in mitosis. Okay. And what happens is in meiosis, the phases, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, they actually each happen twice. And so they're called prophase 1, metaphase 1, anaphase 1, telophase 1. So in meiosis, one of the most important differences between mitosis and meiosis is how the chromosomes line up. In mitosis, if you remember in metaphase, how did the chromosomes line up? Where were they located? In metaphase. I remember, where were the chromosomes in metaphase? What did I tell you to remember then? M in metaphase?
Middle.
They're all in the middle, single file. So in mitosis, all the chromosomes line up. Let's do 5 chromosomes. They all line up like this. Can you guys see this? Yes? Okay. Actually, let's make it sense. Okay. In meiosis, they line up differently. In meiosis, so this is mitosis. In meiosis, they line up in pairs. Like that. You guys see this?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So the process is pretty much the same. Remember, the spindle fibers form. The chromosomes get pulled apart, but this time in meiosis, the two partners are going to get split up from each other and go to opposite ends of the cell. And eventually the cell will split. And each cell now is going to only get half the number of chromosomes. So that's an important difference. In meiosis, the chromosomes match up with their partners. Okay? We call this homologous chromosomes. Homologous chromosomes are two partner chromosomes. They have similar types of information. They have similar genes, but they're not identical to each other. We have 23 pairs of these chromosomes. Half of them we got from our mother, half of them we got from our father. But they all have a partner. And so that's an important thing to know about meiosis. The chromosomes match up with their partners. And something else can happen here. Look at this diagram. So when these two chromosomes, this red and blue chromosome, when they found each other during meiosis, what happened here?
They give each other a part of theirs.
Yes, they swapped a little piece of chromosome with each other. That process is called crossing over, and it's really important. It's important because it adds variation, it adds variety to the genes, right? Because you're swapping a piece of the mother's chromosome with a piece from the father's chromosome. It's kind of like you had 2 decks of cards and you kind of shuffle them together. You're mixing up the genes.
It's mushing Uno with Monopoly.
Sort of, yeah, sort of. So that process happens only during meiosis, because that's the only time the chromosomes line up with their partners like this. After the chromosomes line up with their partners, they get pulled apart, separate from each other, and they get split into 2 cells. Okay? And that's what we see here in this diagram. This diagram shows the first part of meiosis. The nuclear membrane disappeared. We see these chromosomes lined up with their partners. We also see they crossed over, they exchanged little pieces. They went to the middle of the cell and they got pulled apart, heading to opposite ends. Then what happens with those chromosomes is they divide a second time. This is called prophase 1, prophase 2, metaphase 2, anaphase 2, telophase 2. And it's really just like mitosis. The chromosomes line up. Okay. They line up now single file because they don't have partners anymore. The chromosomes get split up by the spindle fibers and get pulled to opposite ends of the cell. So let's look at this diagram. This is important. Here's our starting cell. No problem. How many chromosomes does this cell have?
2.
No?
4.
4. Remember, so they copy themselves. Now we have a cell that has 4 still, but they're doubled, X's. They line up with their partners. Just like that. They could exchange pieces. And then they get split up. And then the cell divides a second time. Again, this time they line up single file. The 2 halves of the X get pulled apart. And we form 2 new cells. So how many chromosomes are in these cells?
2.
How many we start with?
4.
That's meiosis.
It went over to half of it went over to their kids, so
Exactly.
they only have half of the left.
So after meiosis, one cell produced how many cells?
4.
One cell made 4 cells with half the number of chromosomes. Also, what you notice is these cells, are they identical to each other?
Yes.
They are?
No, they're not.
No.
They're
This one got
smaller.
half of a blue and the big blue and half of the small red. This one got the full red and the small blue. So they're different from each other. And if there were more chromosomes, they'd all be very different from each other. What are these cells going to go on and become in a human or in an animal?
DNA.
Well, they're made of DNA, but the cell itself,
Reproductive.
a reproductive cell, a gamete, a sperm cell, or an egg cell. Here's another way to look at it.
There's a stupid fly I'm trying to kill.
Yeah, I got them in my office trying to track them. So here's just another way to look at it. So these become sperm and egg cells in humans and animals that reproduce sexually. Now, the sperm cell is carrying 23 chromosomes from the father. An egg cell has 23 chromosomes from the mother. And when they combine during fertilization, they're going to form a cell that has 46, which is the correct number. And here's the important thing to know is that each sperm cell is different from the others. They don't all have the same 23 chromosomes in them. Because of crossing over, because of this random sorting of the chromosomes, every sperm cell, every egg cell is going to have a very different combination of chromosomes from the parent that produced it. This is also why humans, brothers and sisters, are not identical to each other.
Unless they're identical.
Well, unless they're identical twins, and we'll talk about that too. Good point, Isaiah. But just regular brothers or sisters, they don't look identical to each other because the chromosomes that I happen to get from my parents are a different set than the ones my sister happened to get, even though we have the same parents. The chromosomes that I got from my parents are different. And that's why there's a lot of variation in organisms that reproduce sexually, because these chromosomes end up in the sperm and egg cells randomly. So if we compare mitosis and meiosis, so mitosis, it happens when organisms reproduce asexually. when organisms are just making a copy of themselves. Meiosis only takes place for sexual reproduction. In humans, it happens in the ovaries in females. That's where egg cells are produced. In males, it happens in the testes, so where sperm cells are produced. That's the only place in a human meiosis happens. Everywhere else in the whole human body, in the brain, in the heart, in the lungs, in the muscles, and so forth, any other time cells are dividing, it's by mitosis. Mitosis takes the normal chromosome number, which we abbreviate 2N, and keeps it the same. It makes cells that also have the same number of chromosomes. Not meiosis, though. Meiosis takes chromosomes and divides cells and divides their number of chromosomes in half. In mitosis, the cells never align with each other, with their partners, so there's no crossing over. In meiosis, they do line up with their partners. There can be that exchange that's called crossing over. In mitosis, the cells that are produced are exactly the same. They're just identical copies of the first original cell. In meiosis, the cells are different from each other. There's what we call variation. Finally, the end product of mitosis are two cells. One cell produces two cells that are identical. The end result of meiosis is four cells, each of which are different from each other. Okay. Any questions about our notes on meiosis? Okay.
That was Mr. Perry.
That was Mr. Perry.
Why is he in this